When we are looking at the world, we usually have this very strong sense that the objects we are looking at are somehow very solid, permanent, concrete, and lasting. But I want to suggest to you that this is really a misperception, in a sense, a kind of wrong interpretation of our experience. It might be useful to some degree, of course, but if we become attached to our idea of what the world is really like, then it can really seem to hide the actuality of our experience from us. We can seem to overlook what this field of experience, which takes the shape of the world, really is. And in this video, I want to guide you to this noticing of what our experience is actually like and whether we really do experience consistent, solid, concrete objects. The sense of the permanence of objects is usually especially strong in the visual field for us, because we seemingly look at something and we have this impression that the object somehow always stays the same. We are really seeing the object as it really is. So let's take a look at that. Let's see whether that actually is true in our experience. And in order to first approach this, let's just get a sense for the experience of seeing in of itself. Because already there are a bunch of misconceptions here which kind of color how we are experiencing the seeing. We can of course notice in our day-to-day life that the visual field is always in motion. We are never looking at the same thing usually for even a second. The attention is always fluctuating, and this is especially obvious if we are moving, right? If we're out and about, or if we're riding a bicycle or driving a car, you can get the sense that the entirety of what you're seeing is always in motion. And usually our interpretation of that is that we are moving and the world is still. And we therefore have the sense that these objects, the world, is somehow stable and permanent. But we can see that the visual field, even if we are sitting perfectly still, is never this permanent thing. It never consists of these solid concrete objects. So in order to approach this, let's first of all close our eyes. And I invite you to do this with me, because if you're just listening to me, the point really won't land. So as we have our eyes closed here, notice that you are seeing this blackness right now. This darkness which fills up the visual field. But already what we can notice here is that this blackness is not really a blackness. If we actually pay attention to what's happening here right now with this experience of seeing, we can notice that there are all these vibrations in the visual field, flickers of light, parts that get illuminated all the time. This blackness is really a flow of brightness and darkness. Notice how this visual field is never standing still. There's really no constancy to it. Everything is moving. So what we believe to be this permanent, stable experience of seeing the darkness is really just a constant flow of colors and impressions. So now open your eyes again. And for this next part, it's actually ideal if you look at a blank wall or a blank space. But if that's not available to you right now, don't worry, just look out into the room and it will work just as well with that. So just like we were noticing the vibration of this black field earlier, let's now do the same thing with our eyes open. So you can now stop looking at the video, just look out into the room or at a wall. And first of all, just relax your eyes a bit. Get a kind of panoramic view of what you are seeing, so you are aware of the entirety of the visual field. Already there's a sense of relaxation here. And what you can notice, first of all, is that the parts of your visual field which you're actually seeing with clarity, with focus, with sharpness, is very, very small. We usually have this idea that we are somehow seeing everything with a kind of clarity, and only the very periphery of our visual field is somehow blurry. But in actuality, the part that's actually in focus is quite small. And if you have someone else in the room with you right now, you can also do a small experiment where this other person moves an object into your visual field and you don't know what the object is, right? And just try to see at what point you actually recognize the object. And you will see that this happens quite late. Because, as I said, the part where you can actually see with sharpness in the visual field is so small. But this is something we overlook, right? We have this idea that we are somehow always seeing with a kind of certainty what's in front of us. But what this makes clear is that almost everything in the visual field is just interpreted. We just have these broad shapes and colors, and the supercomputer of the mind somehow forms this impression that we really are seeing these distinct concrete objects in our peripheral vision. But really, if you pay attention to what this experience is like, then you can notice that this is just interpreted. And of course, this is quite useful. I'm not saying that we should get rid of that. I'm just suggesting that we can notice that this is what's happening. This already shows us that this idea of seeing a world out of objects, which is somehow constant, solid, and permanent, is an illusion. But let's take it further than that, right? So again, just look out at what you are seeing. Relax again, include the entire visual field. And just stay with this wide open vision without focusing on anything in particular. And just like we did with the eyes closed earlier, notice right now how the visual fields, even if you're just looking straight ahead, is far from being this constant thing made out of these permanent objects. It's much more accurate to say that the visual field is in constant motion. And just like we did with the eyes closed earlier, notice right now how the visual fields, even if you're just looking straight ahead, is far from being this constant thing made out of these permanent objects. It's much more accurate to say that the visual field is in constant motion. Different parts get illuminated. Some parts get blurry, and even objects can disappear when you just keep this relaxed, wide open vision. Notice how everything is constantly shifting. Even your attention, if you try to keep it somewhere, never quite stays there. It's like the visual field has this flow of vibrations in it. Lightness, darkness, different parts get illuminated. No color ever stays in the exact same position. And already you see that even when we're trying to be still, when we're trying to restrict movement, The visual field is still moving. Now let's take it a step further. We already see now that the visual field is this flow of shapes and colors, even if we're staying still. But what if the attention gets brought specifically to an object? Because this is our usual idea of an object being permanent. We direct our attention to it, seemingly, and we then have this idea that we are seeing the object exactly as it is, exactly as it exists out there. So for this, you can really pick any object you are seeing in front of you. It doesn't matter what it is. And take this object and really give it an honest look right now. See what this object is like. See all the details of it. Let's look at its color first of all. We have this idea that this name we have for this color somehow describes what we are seeing. But amazingly, if you actually look at this object right now and you see its color, you can quite easily see that the name you have doesn't get you any closer to the actual experience of the color. You may call this blue or bronze or green or yellow, whatever it is you're looking at. But do any of these words describe this experience of seeing this color right now? And now try to see the entirety of this object all at once. See what this object is really like in its totality. Can you do that? Or is it not the case that the more you look at it, the more you see different facets of this object? The more you look at it, the more these different characteristics become apparent. The way the light reflects on it, the way it's formed, the parts which seem worn off, the parts of it which are shining. Isn't it the case that you can always find a new detail about this object? Always a new way of looking at it? Do you ever get to the essence of what this thing is? Or is it just the case that what you know of this object is just constantly shifting? Our usual way of looking at an object is to have this concept and just be attached to this concept. And this attachment to the concept seems to blind us from the actuality of what we are experiencing. I can have a name for this thing I'm looking at. But what does this name really say about it? If I look at this object honestly, I just find more and more and more about it. There are almost infinite details which I can notice. And the crucial thing is that I can never see all the aspects, all the details of this object all at once. It's like the more I look at it, the more I fall into this infinity of the object. And my word for it gives me the impression that I somehow know what it is. That I'm somehow experiencing the entirety of what it is. But that's quite impossible, because the closer I go up to it, the more I look at it, the more it seemingly slips away. I can never get to what it really is, because it always reveals itself to be different. My attention never stays on one aspect of this object. It always vacillates, falls here and there. Different parts of the object disappear, and others shine. And what's the truth of it? What aspect really describes this object? We're just free falling into infinity if we actually try to get to the essence of what it is. And yet, when we look at it in an ordinary way, we seem to know exactly what it is. And that's fine. We don't have to get rid of the concepts. The concepts are useful, or at least for the most part they are useful. But don't let the idea of what you are seeing blind you from the actuality of what you are experiencing. You are not experiencing permanent, lasting objects. You are just experiencing this seamless, vibrant visual field, always shape-shifting, never in the same position, always revealing something new about itself. It has endless details, and you can never capture all of them. And seeing this, seeing how reality is ultimately undefinable and unfindable, has a liberating effect. When we grasp onto something, when we get attached to something, this causes us suffering. But the presumption is, of course, that we know what we are attaching to. We know what this object of our experience is. When we see, however, that we can't know what it is, that all descriptions fall short, then this attachment naturally loosens up. And the peace which is already here comes to the foreground. I hope you enjoyed this exploration, and if anything remains unclear, just write in the comments. If you'd like to explore this topic or others more in depth, you can also use the links in the description to contact me directly. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you right here next time.